In the evening, the order arrived from the Corps headquarters, according to which the division received the task to break through the enemy's defense in the area of farms Novaya Zizn, Zolotoy, to seize the fight of 144.1, Lopatine, settlement, and railway station Kostyukovka. According to the intelligence, in the offensive zone of the division, Hitlerites had time to create large resistance nodes, including engineering structures, pillboxes, bunkers, cut-off positions, solid minefields, a network of wire fences. The terrain favored the enemy. Riding the hills, the Germans under crossfire held the approaches to the front line. Therefore, the implementation of the upcoming task imposed great responsibility on the organizers of the battle. On the initiative of the division headquarters, the regimental artillery, a battery of the fighter anti-tank division, partly units of the artillery regiment were attached to the rifle battalions. The artillery was to be used as infantry escort guns. The exception were 2 batteries of 418 IPTAD and a company of PTR. They were included in the anti-tank reserve of the division commander and took up firing positions at the tank dangerous direction, the crossroads of Raduga, Kalche, Kalino. In the division headquarters, regiments, battalions, companies were intensively preparing for the offensive. Commanders, political workers in the course of work, with people used the decrees of the Presidium of the Supreme Soviet of the USS on the establishment of the Order of Victory and on the establishment of the Order of Glory I degree published in the central newspapers. In the headquarters of the division held a political information. The head of the political department, Lieutenant Colonel Zhivago, speaking to us. Sink, comrades, in the very word, victory. It embodies the dream of each of us. We are going to it by difficult front roads. In the fire of battles we lose comrades, friends, relatives, but no matter how hard it is, we will win. We will come to it, to the joy of our mothers, fathers, wives, brothers and sisters, the entire Soviet people. By nightfall on November 21, the division was ready for the offensive. Forward regiments took the initial position, artillerymen and mortars, the main positions. Major Konstantin Sergeyevich Lapshin's sappers returned from the front line. They made passes in wire barriers and minefields of the enemy. On the account of the battalion were thousands of neutralized mines, not counting the digging and equipment of trenches, dugouts, various kinds of shelters. And all this in the dark time of the day. When the day came, there was enough work in the rear. We built passages, exits, roads. Whenever I came to them, the sappers were always busy working. Combat Lapshin was hard to find in the headquarters. Konstantin Sergeyevich, short in stature, staid, even phlegmatic to some extent, was usually with people, and therefore where the personnel worked. He listened to me calmly and did not hurry to name this or that data. If something was not ready or he had doubts about something, he asked me to wait, named the terms of fulfillment. There was no need to check him. His words did not disagree with deeds. That's how he remained in my memory. We, officers of the operational department of the division, met the dawn on our feet, although the Chief of Staff allowed us to rest for an hour or two, nor was our Chief Major Rumyantsev against it. Pyotr Vasilyevich himself continued to check the situation on the map. Looking at him, we also did not stop working. In the morning, the commanders of the attached and supporting units, communication officers arrived to the headquarters. It was no time to sleep. Before dawn, a little snow fell, the wind dispersed the clouds, and a light frost began to grab the thaw. We rejoiced. If the weather improves, our aviation will have the opportunity to strike at reconnaissance targets of the enemy and objects in the depth of his defense. Aviation support was also necessary from a moral point of view. The fact is that on this small bridgehead for several days in a row were fierce fighting. Having fixed, as already mentioned, on the hills dominating over the terrain, the enemy had time to prepare the terrain in engineering terms, created a good fire system, in addition, had the opportunity to maneuver forces and means. Repeated attempts of divisions of the first echelon of our corps to break through the German defences were not successful. Meanwhile, the command demanded decisive action. It is clear why. By cutting the railroad at Kostyukovka station, we deprived the Nazis of maneuver, covered Gomel from the north, the garrison of which continued to hold back the advance of the army. However, our hopes for aviation support were not destined to come true. At dawn the thaw began, the fog began to roll in, rising from the lowlands. And at the beginning of the 8th, the 889th Infantry Regiment received an alarming message. The enemy's leading edge was not visible. Similar news came from Major Nikolai Viktorovich Krasovsky, commander of the 828th Rifle Regiment. Soon our observation post was in a milky veil. Representatives of the corps and the army were worried. Alarm calls began. We did not dare to attack the enemy at the appointed time. An hour passed in languid expectation. The second hour went by. Nervous were commanders, staff officers, personnel on the marching lines for the attack. All languished uncertainty. Colonel Danilovsky did not go to the phones, measured steps back and forth trench, leading from the observation post to the dugout. The calls were answered by the division chief of staff. At about 10 o'clock, he picked up the phone and listened to the caller, surprised interrogation. What to attack? Are you out of your mind, Krasovsky? You can't see anything at 20 paces. Cannon fighters refuse to conduct artillery preparation. And after a moment's hesitation, he continued. Let's bring Zabaznov here with your conclusions and suggestions. While the Chief of Staff of the 828th Rifle Regiment, Captain Alexei Prokorovich Zabaznov, reached the division commander's MP. Major Krasovsky's proposal was known to the officers of the headquarters. They say that Krasovsky is used to take the enemy quietly, from around the corner, and now he proposes to go to the machine guns without artillery preparation, hinting at the past of Nikolai Viktorovich. Before the war, he was the head of the Border Guard detachment. But Colonel Danilovsky looked at the officer so much that he hurried to shut up. In about 40 minutes, Captain Zabaznov arrived, tired, in mud-stained boots and overcoat. Captain Levin's battalion, reported the captain to the division commander and the chief of staff. Using the fog, bypassed the Germans' guard, came close to the passage in the enemy's wire fences, and the group allocated for reconnaissance moved further. The Germans are behaving calmly, playing. Playing how? On harmoniums, out of boredom. They're not waiting for us, Comrade Colonel. Levin suggests using the situation to attack without artillery preparation. There is a rational grain in this, said Danilovsky thoughtfully. What do you think, Fedor Fedorov? I think so, replied the chief of staff of the division. What the hell is not joking, as they say. If there was no luck, misfortune would have helped. Allow me to continue, gave a voice Captain Zabaznov. My commander and I propose to attack at 12 o'clock. Why? Major Rumyantsev asked. At 12 the Krauts go to the rear to dine, and the positions remain only on duty. We were warned about this predecessors, scouts of the 260th Division, and we saw for ourselves yesterday. They don't even take their personal weapons with them. What impertinent people, shook his head Lieutenant Colonel Abashev. They are sure that they will not be disturbed, summarized Colonel Danilovsky. That's why they behave carelessly, and thoughtfully shifting his bushy eyebrows to the bridge of his nose. Do you know what thought came into my head? The enemy will probably not wait for us also, because he has recently gotten used to our classic offensive. Morning, artillery preparation. The German is by nature a pedant. Though he learns his lessons, he subconsciously slips back to his principles. So we're going to shake him up, not according to the established canons. I'll report my decision to the commander, and the commander should be informed. I've done it several times. The lieutenant general is dissatisfied. He thinks we're treading water. Fyodor Semyonovich Danilovsky coughed, looked at Captain Zabaznov. You and Krasovsky, thank you. And don't forget to thank Levin and his subordinates for their savvy and sensible suggestions. Zabaznov went out. The division commander looked at his watch and turned to Chief of Staff Abashev. So, at 12. Prepare the order. Krasovsky will start, but let him move out and be ready. Maybe they should attack at the same time. Think it over, Fedor Fedorovich. All right, we'll think it over. It was decided to attack the enemy with 2 regiments. The main attack was made by Major Krasovsky's 828th Regiment, with Captain Levin's and Captain Golovko's battalions in the 1st Echelon and Captain Ivanitsky's battalion in the 2nd. All 3 officers 3 days later were awarded the military rank of Major. In Krasovsky's regiment, I happened to be half an hour before the offensive. Calmly, without hurrying, Nikolai Viktorovich was giving the last orders. Captain Ivanitsky's battalion, by landing on tanks and self-propelled artillery units attached to us, is breaking through to the rear of the enemy with the task of suppressing the enemy's artillery and mortar batteries. They are here. Skrazovsky red pencil circled the firing positions of enemy batteries on the map scribbled along and across the coloured pencils. Continued. We will be finishing off the enemy in the first trenches at this time. In his voice there was so much confidence in success that none of those around him doubted that this was how the battle would proceed. And this confidence was transmitted to the soldiers. They were in that state of mind in which a man is on the eve of accomplishment of an important life's work. I looked into the scouts' dugout. The fighters were examining weapons, smoking. One of them started to pull out fresh underwear from his duffel bag, but he was immediately stopped. "Are you going to die? Wait, there's still a lot to do, you'll have time." It was obvious that everyone, from the commander to the soldier, lived for the task ahead, believing that they would fulfill it. Deputy commander of the political part of Major Saltykov, passing me a political report. "Tell the head of the political department. The task will be accomplished." At 12 o'clock, the regiment went up to the attack. Our appearance in front of the enemy was indeed a surprise for him. Enemy observers and machine gunners on duty in the first trench threw down their weapons and ran. The enemy guard had been removed a few minutes earlier. The soldiers Lavin and Golovko appeared as ghosts in front of the enemy's second trench. Hitlerites were taking food, and at first they did not pay attention to the chain that appeared out of the fog, and when they realized it, they panicked and rushed back to the trench. Some immediately fell under machine gun bursts, squirming in death spasms on the snow-covered ground. Others rushed to the saving rear. Soldiers and commanders chased the fascists, shot them at point-blank range, stabbed them with bayonets, beat them with rifle butts. Russian man is terrible in anger and unstoppable. Sometimes he is not tall enough and not much strength, but he goes straight through, destroys everything in his way. This is the strength of spirit that has been inherent in him for centuries. The strength of spirit gave birth to the heroes of the battles on Lake Pipsy, Kulikovo Field, at Poltava, Borodino Field, and many other battles. It helped us to defeat the fascist hordes at Moscow, Stalingrad, Kursk, on the Now it helped us on this nameless bridgehead near the Soch River. Gradually the battle on the bridgehead took a focal character. Battalions and companies destroyed the enemy in its resistance nodes. But there was in these, at first glance seemingly disparate, actions in common, moving forward from trench to trench, from position to position deep into the enemy's defense. We could hear the voices of guns of different caliber. The Sorokapiatiki were sounding deafeningly, the anti-tank guns, or as they had already been dubbed, Zeraboys, and howitzers were sounding harshly, with some sort of a kanaye. Somewhere in the depths of the enemy's defences, shaking the surroundings, the explosions of RS shells rang out. The Katyusha division attached to us fired a salvo at the advancing Nazi reserves. The division headquarters began to receive data on the results of the battle. Major Zaitis' 889th Rifle Regiment reached the positions of the enemy regimental reserves in less than 2 hours. Krasovsky advanced even further. The 3rd Battalion of the regiment, having pulled ahead with tanks and SARs, continued to destroy manpower and firepower in the enemy rear. Junior Lieutenant Ponomarenko's platoon captured 5 serviceable 6-barrel mortars with a full set of ammunition at the enemy position. Other units, many officers, sergeants and soldiers also distinguished themselves. Komsorg of the 1st Rifle Battalion Senior Sergeant Pyotr Verty raised a company pinned down by enemy machine gun fire in the attack. Private Grigory Prytichenko of the same battalion, dragging his comrades into the attack, destroyed an enemy machine gun with a grenade. Division Commander, Chief of Staff, hurried regiments. Not let the enemy to come to his senses, demanded from Major Zait's Colonel Danilovsky. Snarls, crush him, before he came to his senses. It's good that the commander of the German division left in his dugout dress uniform with regalia and a frying pan with hot scrambled eggs. Quite murmured into the tube Lieutenant Colonel Abashev. But it's a pity that he himself slipped away. I think you're not going to eat fascist food, Krasovsky. Your task is to go forward and forward. The main thing for us is Kostyukovka, the railroad. Understand? At 16 o'clock the sun came out. The fog began to thin. At first the outlines of juniper bushes and rare birches became visible, then trenches with machine gun nests, trenches, positions of light mortars, blackened equipment left by the tanks, armoured personnel carriers, assault guns, anti-aircraft guns on the positions, tractors with their blunt noses in the ground. All this was chaotically scattered along the front and deep into the German defences, and all this was almost intact, so swiftly fled the Nazis. That's what surprise means. The enemy defence, which the corps units unsuccessfully stormed for several days, was overcome with little blood. regiments continued to fight deep in the enemy's defences. By 17 o'clock, the farms of Kontorovka, Noviki, Kanitov, Stashki were taken, or rather to say, the places where they used to be located. The fascists completely destroyed all the buildings, and the inhabitants were evicted, the animals themselves scattered in the surrounding gullies. The advance battalions approached the large farms Orel and Ostrov. The neighbours were also beginning to succeed. According to the information coming to the headquarters, the 96th Rifle Division was engaged in street battles in the village of Raduga. 260th Rifle Division, although slowly, but was advancing on the left flank. It seemed that on this day we would continue to be lucky, but alas, we, having sent another report on the advance of the advanced regiments to the headquarters of the Corps and the Army, were already preparing to move to a new command and observation post, when German planes emerged from under the peeping sun. Anti-aircraft installations struck in unison. The frequent clatter of our anti-aircraft guns from the Soj crossing was heard. Junkers, keeping a clear line, passed over the headquarters, divided into two groups, and rushed to the rear of the rifle regiments stretched out in marching columns. They dropped bombs. Deadly cargo hit the target. Having shelled with machine gun fire cars and wagons with ammunition, food, various property, Hitlerites flew away. In about 10 or 15 minutes, our bombers appeared under cover of fighters. We looked at the Red Star airplanes with joy. And what was our disappointment when we received a message from Major Krasovsky that our regiment's units, which had broken out ahead, had also fallen under their bombs. To blame the pilots would be unfair. They had not yet received the latest information about the situation of the units. A dear price had to be paid for insufficient communication between ground troops and aviation. While the causes of what had happened were being investigated, calls and inquiries were being answered. The early November twilight descended on the ground. By this time, the advanced units had reached Lopatine, where they were stopped by the enemy. A decision had to be made. Major Rumiantsev sent us to the regiments to clarify the achieved boundaries. I don't remember exactly what time it was, but about midnight I reached the location of the 889th Regiment. While I was looking for the headquarters, everybody said that it was somewhere near, but nobody knew exactly. I was thoroughly cold. At last I met a sergeant communicator, or rather I went out to his grumbling voice. Connecting scraps of wires, he was cursing some. They give me all kinds of greenery before the offensive. They sigh, teach, Semyonov, teach. But when you teach, you have to work, you have to fulfill the task. So you do everything by yourself, so they're all sneezing. Who are you sneezing like that, Sergeant? A series of rockets that flew upwards illuminated me. Who? My aides, Comrade Senior Lieutenant. The sergeant sighed and started splicing the cable end. We laid the wires together. They were hit by one mine. The headquarters was left without communication. The regiment commander promised to organize a bath today. In general, it's all our fault. It's all our fault. And you're back with us again. Have we met before, Sergeant? Yes, we have. You came to our regiment before Soch. That's when I noticed you. Well, if that's the case, take me to headquarters. Now just splice the ends. Semyonov connected the bare parts of the wire and began to quickly wrap them with duct tape. His face and hands, not to mention his boots and overcoat, were covered with mud. Noticing that I was looking at him with interest, he dried Maitner caught in a funnel. At that time, the sky was again strewn with rockets. The Krauts are afraid, as if at night they would not scare them away. They are shining, shelling from the heights, pelting them with mines and shells, damn them. But what's the use? They only worry themselves. The sergeant started to argue about the senselessness of fascist resistance, but I hurried him up. Soon we were walking along the path trampled by the communicators, Semyonov in front, followed by me, and then by the machine gunners who accompanied me. Every now and then the sky was coloured by cascades of rockets. Somewhere not far away I heard the rumble of an airplane. A German frame, explained the talkative sergeant. Now the illumination will be hung up. The Krauts are cowardly. Soon the flare bombs really flashed. The area was flooded with bluish light. Clearly and distinctly became visible hillocks, hollows, trees, bushes, paths flooded with water in the lowlands funnels. You can count the needles, Comrade Senior Lieutenant. Simonov turned around. There's not talk, hurry up, while the German conditions creates. In about 20 minutes we arrived at the regiment headquarters. We entered a well-equipped dugout and immediately fell into the rhythm of regimental life. Telephones were ringing. Liaisons arrived from the units with messages. Chief of Staff Nikolai Sergeyevich, listening to subscribers and liaisons on the phone, clarified the position of the battalions. On my appearance only nodded, continuing to do his work. At the back wall of the dugout, the regimental commander was going through some papers on a hastily made camp table. In the corner, on the right side of the commander, was talking about something with the regimental commissars Nikolaev, Major Kulyabin. Nikolai Sergeyevich reminded the commander about the submissions on the distinguished, took his eyes off the papers Major Zayat's. No man should remain forgotten. Philip Fedorovich was cheerful and excited. Signing the award relay, the major recalled the details of the episodes of today's battle. "No, whatever you say, Nikolai Afanasyevich," he turned to Major Kulyabin, "but I am satisfied with today. Everyone fought well. Remember Gunnar Mekontsev? Small stature, stubby little guy? That's him. This puny suppressed 2 firing points, and when the Krauts counterattacked, he stopped the infantry that was trembling. So you're not handsome, and you're small in the bone. Well, and the 7th Company fought on the farm. Didn't they report to you? In a half envelope, they didn't take a step back, no matter how hard they tried to knock them out. I wanted to bring a platoon of machine gunners to help it, but it went on the attack. She chased the German, and she chased him like hell. I've been awarded the Red Army men Soplyakov, Lunev, Melnikov. Why aren't there any sergeants' officers? Nikolai Sergeyevich, ask the battalion commander what the reason is. By the way, why do not see the names of scouts? Then the conversation between the commander and the chief of staff turned to the system of fire, the preparation of weapons for night fighting, issues of guarding. Scouts do not break away from the enemy, reminded the commander of the regiment. Stay as close to him as possible. It would be good to look in his rear. Now I'll set a task for the scouts. While I mapped the outline of the front line, from the battalions arrived Captains Sergei Yurkov and Anatoly Vohintsev. Political workers confirmed the commander's opinion that the offensive without artillery preparation is out of the question. Meanwhile, senior commanders hurried with the offensive. Returning to the NP division, reported to Major Rumyantsev on the completion of the task and his conclusions regarding the continuation of the offensive. "It's already decided," waved his hand Pyotr Vasilevich. "At dawn the regiments will attack the farms Ostrov and Oral." However, the attack was not successful. Then the enemy threw in reinforcements and began to counterattack at the junction of the 828th Regiment and Dnieper on the left. 96th Infantry Division. The spearhead of the fascist blow was directed to the farm Novaya Zhizn, which was defended by a separate company of Senior Lieutenant Veniamin Makurin attached to the division. Tanks, was carried from cell to cell, surrounded coming in the rear. The roar of the engines could be heard more and more clearly from the flanks of the company position occupied at the fork of dirt roads, not yet recovered from the bombing. With bloodshot eyes, Makurin shouted to platoon commanders into the telephone receiver. "Do not leave the trenches. Throw grenades and Molotov cocktails at the tanks. Cut off the infantry." In these minutes, the battle was already unfolding at the company's position. Anti-tank guns were clicking deftly, machine guns were pouring in fractional oversamples. Tanks, however, stubbornly climbed through. The first 2 crawled out on the berms of the trenches, spun over the cells and went on. Following one of them, a soldier stood up from the trench. He tried it on, threw a bottle with force into the stern and skidded down. The fighting vehicle continued to move, and after it stretched a plume of black smoke. "It's burning." Cut through the rumble of battle, someone shouted. "Beat the Germans. Fight." Our artillery opened fire on the German tanks and machine gunners who had broken into the farm. Makurin joyfully looked back, led a look at the company's defences, and in full lungs shouted, as if in this hellish noise the soldiers could hear him. "No home, guys? Hold on. All Russia is looking at us." And the guys held on. The wounded did not leave the rifle cells until the German counterattack was smothered, and the Nazis did not retreat, leaving 4 burning tanks and up to 50 dead machine gunners at the company's position. Only then fighters began to dress wounds, bury dead comrades. While Makurin's company repulsed the enemy counterattack, the regiment's repeated attack knocked out the Germans from the farms Ostrov and Oral. The enemy began to retreat. Our units managed to advance another 3 or 4 kilometers, but it was a difficult advance. Almost every meter had to pay with lives. Ahead was Lopatine. A small village, like hundreds of others, scattered across the sand hills of the Belarusian Polisi. The surviving wooden houses looked out at the lowlands that bordered them. The Germans turned the village into a resistance node, and this node turned out to be a very hard nut to crack. Once again we had to wait for artillery to bring ammunition to tanks and saw, and time passed. A short day slipped by unnoticed. From the headquarters of the Corps received an order to seize Lopatine at night. We had to pull up the 862nd Infantry Regiment. However, its battalions were also stopped by crossfire of fascists. The fight lasted all night. The morning of November 23 came cloudy, cold. The Corps and Army headquarters demanded decisive action. The railroad and highway were still in the hands of the enemy, and his artillery continued to bombard our fighting order. The task assigned to the division had not yet been fully accomplished. Commanders and staffs continued to look for the most acceptable option to seize Lopatine, followed by Kostyukovka, but they had not found it yet. During the day the battle was held with varying success, and did not bring significant changes in the position of the parties, except for the fact that the 828th Rifle Regiment of Major Krasovsky, repulsing a counterattack, inflicted serious damage to the Germans. Battalions burned 6 enemy tanks, 4 armoured personnel carriers, destroyed several companies of infantry. The next day did not bring any changes, although the division headquarters set the most decisive tasks before the units. But all the efforts of the regiments came to naught. The enemy's defence was strong and seemed invulnerable. Our attacks met hurricane artillery fire and counterattacks. On the battlefield accumulated out-of-service equipment. In this pile of metal were our 30 checkers. Looking at them, involuntarily thought, did the crews manage to get out, and where are they? These brave guys, always with respect for us, infantrymen, are they alive? Nothing, however, could hold back the spring of our offensive, which had been compressed to nothing. Now it could only unwind. On the night of November 25, by order of the Corps headquarters, regrouping of forces was carried out. The 828th Rifle Regiment transferred its right flank to the neighbouring 96th Rifle Division. The offensive line of our division narrowed, although the task remained the same, to seize the village of Lopatine and the railway station Kostyukovka. I remember, late in the evening we were working on the next report to higher headquarters. Colonel Danilovsky came in, fit, gaunt, seemingly possessing inexhaustible energy. This time Fyodor Semyonovich looked tired. "Would you like some tea, operators?" "With great pleasure," answered Rumyantsev. "Then come on, Pyotr Vasilievich, and make it strong enough to keep you awake. And have tea yourself, distract yourself from your writing." We felt that the commander had not come to see us for tea, and when, stirring the thickly brewed drink with a spoon, Fyodor Semyonovich, as if in between, spoke about Lopatine, we realize the commander decided to consult or check the outline decision. During his short tenure as commander, he had done so many times. He usually began with the words, "Listen, strategists, what do you think?" and laid out the gist of the matter. Now, after a moment of silence, sighed, "Heavens, this Lopatine sits in my liver, and I cannot approach. But still there must be a way out. Maybe we should think together, strategists?" "But we suggested," Major Rumyantsev started. "That's not it. I wish we had a couple more options. Let's think, guys, look for the best way to get rid of the Kraut. Lopatine is the key to Kostyukovka. Both we and the Germans understand that. The scouts report that the enemy has no defences, so he's holding on to Lopatine like hell to his soul." After about 30 minutes we offered options, although we is to generalize. The conversation was mainly between Rumyantsev, his assistant Senior Lieutenant Gerasimov, Colonel Danilovsky, and soon came into the dugout Chief of Staff of the division, Lieutenant Colonel Erbashev. Fyodor Semyonovich rejected some proposals at once, asked to think about others, and, having thought about them, disagreed with others. And when it seemed that all options had been exhausted, Pyotr Vasilievich Rumyantsev, as if remembering, thoughtfully, "There is one more option. True, I already suggested it a day ago, but then Lieutenant Colonel Erbashev did not agree with me." "Well, that was then," smiled Fedor Fedorovich. "Time flows, the situation changes. Come on, what you have there, Pyotr Vasilievich, lay it out." So I proposed to strike at the height of 141.6. Major Rumyantsev pushed the map to himself, and, pointing with a sharp pencil on the converging lines of deposits at the top of the height, continued. "According to the data we have, the Germans here are not so large forces. and in engineering terms, it is equipped with weaker than the approaches to Lopatino. With one regiment we break through the defences here and further on to Yeremino, hanging over Lopatine from the west. The Germans are frightened by the encirclement. They will start to transfer forces and means to Yeremino, then the rest of the forces and hit the enemy from the front. Well, Tway stretched Danilovsky, Noi so from the flank. There is something in it. What's your opinion, Fedor Fedorovich? In this area we have not yet tried to break through, Fedor Semyonovich. Ye after a short pause, said Lieutenant Colonel Abashev. All more stormed Lopatilo. I think that under the circumstances in the proposal of Major Rumyantsev as a rational grain, this option should be thought over, Wade. At that time the door of the dugout owned it. There you are, and came a voice from the doorway. On the catcher and the beast runs. Colonel Danilovsky smiled happily. You're easy on the wrist, Pyotr Grigorievich. I wanted to send for you, but you came yourself. Can you guess your thoughts from a distance? What a distance. I barely fought off the phone calls. They're all asking from above, have they taken Lopatino? God damn it. They all want you and Fyodor Fedorovich, but the duty officer says. They've left for the regiment. He told me at once where you were, so I decided to come here. Come in, Pyotr Grigorievich, come in. It seems that the operators found a clue how to outwit the Kraut and take this very Lopatino. The chief of the political department sat down on a crate of shells, wiped his face with the palm of his hand. Fedor Semyonovich Danilovsky outlined the essence of the proposal. Nertui, said Peter Grigorievich Zhavego. I am in favour of it with both hands. Who will we prepare for the breakthrough? 862nd Kozevnikov. The regiment has fewer losses than others, and did not have time to distinguish themselves in this offensive. All this is true, said Lieutenant Colonel Abashev, but as if Kozhevnikov would not make a mess. Maybe we trust Krasovsky. Nikolai Viktorovich will measure 10 times, but rest assured we'll cut off exact. Major Koznikov hot turned to Fedor Fedorovich, the head of the political department. And what do we do? Let's run him, teach, educate. We will not keep until Berlin in the second echelon. And we need a man with fire for this job. Peter Grigorievich was silent, sipped a sip of already cooled tea from the offered mug and continued. Let's entrust Kozevnikov with the breakthrough. I've just been at his place. I was glad to see people. Angry as devils, do not want to tread on the ground, rushing into battle. In this I see the work of the commander, his staff, political workers. By the way, Deputy Commander Kozevnikov Kuzma Ivanovich Kuznetsov is a balanced man. I think that they complement each other. So the time allotted for the preparation of documents flew by quickly. Major Rumyantsev with the finished papers went to the Chief of Staff. Peter Gerasimov and I also came out of the dugout. The front line was silent, only from time to time. Then from our side, then from the German side of the rockets flew up and clattered duty machine guns. Me has calmed down. The Gerasimov nodded in the direction of the enemy after a short pause. All day long he was firing. What a day! Consider since the 21st continuous rumbling from his and our side. I thought my eardrums would burst, especially on the 22nd when fascist planes were bombing us. It's all right. I endured it and will endure it again. A man gets used to everything. I keep asking you, Oltunin, don't you feel attracted to people? You guessed it, I do, and how? Well, I'm like that rivet. I feel I don't belong here. You can learn a lot from us. Danilovsky, Abashev, Rumyantsev, the division service chiefs are knowledgeable men. To be with them for a month or two is like completing your higher courses. The only difference is that here everything is in practice. As our Rumyantsev likes to say, we gain experience on the edge of a knife. That's true. Today's conversation will be remembered for a long time. School? And what a school! I used to think that it was easy for a regimental commander at the front, and there's nothing to say about the commander and staff officers. Not like us, company and platoon, day and night have to plough the front line. Now I realized they have their own front line and even worse than ours. You have to work with your head more and more, not with your throat. And before we shout there, a forward to the attack, or forward for the motherland, they will think for us many times, weigh what will come out of our shout. That's how things are. Our conversation was interrupted by Major Rumyantsev. Are you complaining about your fate? Well, cry in your sleeve. And a little quieter. I understand you guys. Pyotr Vasilievich sighed, waved his hand and went to the dugout. I wrote several reports. Gerasimov nodded after him, asking to be released from the staff work. They promise, but they keep dragging it out. At that time, to the left of Lopatine soared up a series of multicolored rockets. After it, the second, third. From there came the deafening rumble of machine gun and machine gun fire. After that, the Nazi batteries rumbled. Ours struck in response. An artillery duel began, in which more and more firepower from both sides was included. The sky lit up with bluish-dotted tracer bullets. Major Kozhevnikov is on the move. Yes, he's on time. For some time we were still looking at the fire flashes of the leading edge. They grew and shrank, but they did not fade for a second, picking out from the November darkness trees, bushes, hillocks, trenches, pieces of trenches on the field ploughed along and across. On the left flank, where, according to our calculations, the breakthrough began, they shone brighter and went deep into the German defences. The Gerasimov Altunin, came the voice of Major Rumiantsev from the open door of the dugout. We hurried to Pyotr Vasilievich. The major held the telephone receiver to his ear with one hand. With the other, he was writing something quickly on a blank sheet of paper, from time to time repeating, "Yes, yes, I'm listening." After about 3 minutes, Rumiantsev hung up the receiver. Pyotr Vasilievich's face was joyful. "That's it, boys. Kozhevnikov had captured the first and second trenches. Now the battle has spread to the third. The Krauts didn't wait here, they didn't. We didn't know the details of the breakthrough, and Rumiantsev, mapping the situation, familiarized us with them. The front battalions of the 862nd Infantry Regiment approached the enemy unnoticed. The fascists withdrew their combat guard. They were frightened by the actions of our divisional and regimental reconnaissance, which the day before managed to capture several prisoners. Our scouts, taking advantage of this, imperceptibly for the Nazis led battalions close to the first trench. There followed a short artillery attack, and in front of the enemy, as if from under the ground, appeared shooting chains. While the Germans came to their senses, the units took the trench, and without stopping rushed further. Meanwhile, the third enemy trench, running along the crest of the height, was being hammered by our artillery, and the regimental mortars were firing at the firing positions of the batteries located behind the back ridge and ammunition depots. The attack continued. Taking advantage of the enemy's turmoil, Kozhevnikov advanced a platoon of foot reconnaissance with sappers to the rear of the Germans. The scouts, having blown up a warehouse with fuel, increased the panic in the rear of the fascists. To the place of breakthrough Hitlerites, began to throw reinforcements, denuding and already exhausted by previous battles of defense areas near Lopatino. This was what we needed. After waiting for some time, the 261st Artillery Regiment fired on the enemy positions, especially on its flanks. Soon it was joined by the 418th Separate Fighter Anti-Tank Division and artillery of the 828th and 889th Rifle Regiments. The enemy's firing points identified during the day were destroyed. His observation posts were destroyed, and communications were disrupted. The last salvos were especially effective. An attached division of Katyushas joined the artillery preparation. RS salvos on the squares literally swept away the flailing Hitlerite soldiers. After half an hour of artillery preparation, the 828th and 889th Regiments went on the attack. In the meantime, Kozhevnikov's regiment seized the height 141.6 and continued the attack on Yeremino, creating an opportunity not only to bypass Lopatino from the west, but also to cut off the enemy's escape routes. The commander of the 862nd Rifle Regiment, Major Kozhevnikov, used every opportunity to successfully accomplish the task. After mastering the height, Vasily Antonovich turned the right flank battalion to the north, which finally tipped the scales in our direction. Scattered enemy units hastily retreated to Kostyukovka. On the heels of the moved forward units of the regiment, the fate of Lopatino was decided. True, the enemy tried to stop us at the very settlement, but when he realized the futility of his persistence, set fire to the buildings and left the village. However, the battalions that broke into the village, to the delight of the inhabitants, managed to defend some huts from the fire. At dawn, with an assignment from Major Rumiantsev, I found myself in Lopatino. Deep pits and funnels, trees torn out from the roots, roofs of houses blown off by explosions and shell casings, many fresh shining shell casings, from small pistol casings to large artillery casings. In the roadside ditches were the hulks of burned-out cars, twisted iron that used to have its own shape and purpose. but now it was hard to recognize what this or that pile of metal had been before. The locals shoveled the smoking logs, extinguished the smouldering charcoal. An old woman sobbed over the body of a young woman. "Who did you leave me for, an orphan?" Nearby, a child of about 7 years old lay in a pool of blood. They say that they ran into the cellar. An elderly soldier stopped next to me. And the Krauts shot them with a machine gun. I can't say anything. A beast. What senseless cruelty, I thought. We are soldiers, but what do they have to do with it? Women and children. I turned around and went to look for the regimental headquarters. The old woman continued to shout over the bodies of her daughter and grandson. People were carrying their surviving household goods. Troops were marching through the village. Our offensive in the direction of Gomel continued to overflow with spring floods. Troops and units wedged into the enemy's defense lines, cut them, and only then the general success of the liberation of the Belarusian lands was marked. The operation to encircle Gomel, the regional center of Belarus, was coming to its logical conclusion. The Soviet armies, advancing to the northwest, covered it with a ring. The situation of the enemy grouping in this area was becoming more and more difficult. After a desperate 2-day struggle, writes about these events Kurt Tippelskirch, the army command was forced to report that the human resources of the army are on the verge of complete exhaustion, that the barrier south of Gomel broke through, and the army does not have forces with which to stop the Russian troops broke through and close the resulting gaps. In the rear of the enemy in this direction, the guerrillas intensified their activity. Enemy trainloads with equipment, weapons, and manpower were falling under the siding. Many railroad bridges were blown up. For example, only in a small place, Gorvo, the People's Avengers killed more than 150 fascist soldiers and officers, captured 110 vehicles with military cargoes, and held this settlement until the approach of the Soviet army units. The command of the German fascist army could not stabilize the situation. Units and units of the enemy, despite strict orders, continued to withdraw, suffering losses in manpower and equipment. At dawn on November 25, the advanced units of the division came to Kostyukovka and fought for the village, while the command was pulling up artillery, and the infantry was concentrating for a decisive rush. Divisional scouts of Major Valentin Korotayev bypassed the station from the flanks and saddled the railroad Gomel-Zilj-Lobine. The railroad Gomel-Netiantinkovichi was cut by the Soviet unit 7 days earlier. The task set before the division was actually accomplished. The last railroad artery feeding the enemy in Gomel and its suburbs ceased to operate. The enemy's armoured trains were forced to withdraw to Zlobin, and now their artillery could not support the half-enveloped garrison of the city. By a simultaneous attack of 3 rifle regiments, supported by artillery, tanks, and self-propelled guns, the railroad station and the village of Kostyukovka were taken. The station tracks were clogged with echelons with equipment, weapons, ammunition, military equipment, which the Germans did not have time to send to Gomel, or at least unload to reinforce the local garrison. There were also trains with grain, potatoes, vegetables, and other products looted from the local population. In one of the trains was locked cattle. Several steam locomotives stood under steam. The station buildings were drowned in smoke and fire. Wagons were burning, ammunition was bursting, cows were mooing, pigs were squealing, sheep were bleating. Soldiers, sergeants, officers of the regiments, who had not yet cooled down from the battle, were saving the people's good. Now, faster, guys, faster. Major Nikolai Ivanitsky hurried his subordinates. Here are boxes with shells. Come on, let's push on. The wagon rolled slowly, humming and crackling, throwing sparks. As soon as the soldiers rolled it to the reserve track, Ivanitsky shouted at the full force of his vocal cords. March! The men had no time to run away even 100 meters as the explosion rumbled. At the place where the car stood, the rails were shattered, and the heavy wheels together with the axles were thrown 50 meters away. The roof and iron corner posts were twisted beyond recognition and thrown in different directions. The looted people's goods and cattle were handed over to representatives of the local authorities. The offensive continued. On this day, the left flank formations of our Belarusian front approached Gomel from 3 sides and fought in streets of the city. In the morning, the first regional center of Belarusia was cleared of the Nazi invaders. By order of the Corps headquarters, the front of the division's offensive was slightly changed. We were assigned the task to clear from the enemy a section of the railroad towards Zlobin with adjacent settlements. We had to force a small, full-flowing river user with its swampy eastern bank. On the western bank, overgrown with dense forest, according to the testimony of prisoners, the fascists had time to organize a system of fire to equip trenches of full profile with all the engineering attributes. The attempt of the advanced battalions to force the user from the start was not successful. Caught under heavy artillery and machine gun fire and under bombardment, the units were forced to withdraw to the original position. We had to wait for the dark time of day. In the evening, having regrouped forces and means, the units again began to fulfill the assigned task. During a short but powerful artillery preparation, several rifle companies managed to overcome the water barrier. The road to success for the infantry was paved by divisional and regimental scouts. Under the cover of artillery cannonade, they managed to remove the duty shifts of observers. Machine gunners and machine gunners of the enemy spread out along numerous branches of trenches, pelted with grenades the Germans sheltered from the artillery fire. With the end of the artillery preparation on, the general signal companies rushed forward, deep into the enemy defences. In the meantime, all new units crossed to the other side of the river. The Germans began to withdraw in a northwestern direction. Do not give the enemy a break. Hurried us Corps headquarters to create new lines of defence. Slowly advancing, time and again, repeated in the telephone receiver commander. We need to pass as much as possible before dawn. What about dawn? He interrogated Major Kozhivnikov. Don't you know, Vasily Antonovich? Today will be repeated. The aviation will come and you'll be like on a poop. Understand? That's right. Our task is to take the villages of Morozov-Shenier and Potapovka. Then the forest begins. Colonel Danilovsky had no sooner put down the phone, as the phone rang again. Lieutenant Colonel Abashev, Chief of Staff, came to the phone, calling his call sign, calmly said, "Yes, I'm listening to you." As the expression of Fyodor Fedorovich's face changed, it was easy to guess. Something had happened. His right flank lay low. He ran into a minefield. Reports that he's suffering losses. Jumping mines. He can't do it on his own. And the Springminen, or bouncing mine, was well known to us. Its metal casing contained a cylinder filled with 36 shrapnel balls. 3 fuses were screwed into the top cover, 1 pressure-acting and 2 tension-acting. When the protruding tendrils were moved, the charge threw the mine up to a height of 1.5 to 2 meters, where it exploded, striking people within a radius of 15 to 20 meters with balls. This surprise had to be experienced by units of the 889th Rifle Regiment. Danilovsky looked for someone with his eyes and, not finding. Where is the divisional engineer? On UZ. Assigned regiments came up, forcing the river. He's helping. Tell him. Sep immediately a company of sappers to Major Zayids. Tell him what they'll be dealing with. We had to advance in extremely difficult conditions. The bogs had thawed because of the thaw. The streams with thick alder bushes along the banks became difficult to pass. Artillerymen, mortarmen, not to mention tankers, fell behind. The infantry marched without stop. Riflemen, machine gunners, having left in the care of petty soldiers' belongings and stuffed their duffel bags with cartridges and grenades, rushed forward. And still the rifle units were moving slowly. Not as we and higher headquarters wanted. However, it was impossible to blame the commanders, especially the personnel. The enemy, using every opportunity to delay us, fought to the last. The entire burden of fighting with him fell on the shoulders of infantrymen, anti-tank rifles, grenadiers. That's what we had to beat the enemy out of the pillboxes and bunkers. At dawn, the 889th Rifle Regiment broke the resistance of the fascists in the village of Morozovshchina. Regimental Commander Major Zayats reported his decision to take possession of Potapovka. The commander listened to him, clapped, decided to bypass the village on the left and hit 2 battalions from the rear. Act, but do not forget about the flanks. Leave at least a platoon to cover. And anti-tank gun crews. I will. Scouts report. From the direction of Budo-Koshelevo we hear the rumble of German tanks. We don't know how many, but we'll know soon. We're already taking measures here. There's a battery of Iptadovs on the way to you. Your 40-50 tanks are about to catch up. Stand. The maneuver of the 889th Rifle Regiment succeeded. The units broke into the center of Potalovka. Lev Levin's battalion of the 828th Regiment also fought for the northern outskirts of the village. The 862nd Rifle Regiment fought west of the village. From the boundary of Potanovka, the regiments did not advance. The enemy brought reinforcements and began to counterattack. For 2 days, the division units repulsed the onslaught of the enemy. 2 days ceaselessly roared machine guns. Machine guns, the air shook from the bursts of bombs and shells. 2 days, Nazi tanks were burning. For 2 days, the Corps Commander Major General Ivan Alexievich Gartsev demanded, "Hold on, grind down the enemy's manpower and firepower, not a step back." And we held on. The 862nd Rifle Regiment, during the first 2 hours, repulsed 3 enemy counterattacks. The last one was especially persistent. 24 tanks, armoured personnel carriers with infantry, 4 assault guns piled on Captain Ivan Kuznetsov's battalion. It seemed that in this fiery mass of fire there should have been nothing alive. But from the trenches and dugouts, which had collapsed from the explosions, crumpled by the tracks of the vehicles, soldiers were rising. They came up with grenades and bottles with fuel mixture, weapons. They tore Krupp steel, burned the praised Nazi equipment, shot enemy soldiers and officers at point-blank range. They were killed themselves. The enemy's superiority in equipment and manpower was too great. The regiment commander helped the battalion as much as he could. Here already fought Peterovsky, had the NP worried about the outcome of the battle. Notwithstand Kuznetsov, took away from the eyes binoculars deputy commander for political affairs. The Krauts will crush him. Your namesake, Kuzma Ivanovich, will endure. Kozhevnikov turned to him. That's what he was put there to withstand. And yet it is necessary to help him. Vasily Antonovich. I myself see that it is necessary, but with what? You and I have a company of machine gunners in reserve, and the battle is still ahead of us. And after a moment's hesitation, he continued, "Okay, we'll send a platoon of machine gunners. I need to go there too. You're a restless man, Kuzma Ivanovich. Go, but take care of yourself. Stay out of the way." Major Kuznetsov on the way joined the platoon of machine gunners, clerks, communicators, everyone who met on the way. Even the wounded, he didn't order them. No, but it so happened that the communists' Komsomol members, and after them, and everyone who could hold a gun, followed the political commander. Solid replenishment joined Kuznetsov's battalion at a critical moment of the battle. The enemy was thrown back with great losses for him. The regiment did not take a step back, just as stubbornly fought all parts of the division. On December 1, according to the order of the Corps Commander, we surrendered the Singh and took the defence strip of the 323rd Bryansk Rifle Division. Regrouping was due to the fact that the neighbours in previous battles suffered heavy losses. The change took place quickly. The division was tasked to break through the enemy's defences at the line north of the village of Potopovka, southeast of the farm Muravey, height at 146.0. The terrain was full of swamps with stunted bushes. It was drizzling rain all the time. We looked forward to frost and grumbled about the slushy winter. We walked in wet clothes and shoes all the time. There was nowhere to dry off, even in the rear, and there was nothing to speak about the front line. All day of the first day, and on the night of December 2, there were preparations for the breakthrough. The division's attached forces and means occupied the allotted places. Artillery was shooting. Commanders conducted reconnaissance work, coordinated issues of interact. There was a redeployment of the rear. We practiced documents. Again and again clarified the initial position of the regiments for the breakthrough. Major Rumyantsev several times travelled to the front line. Not easy to give us a breakthrough, shook his head Peter Vasilievich. The enemy hooked firmly. In these days we got information that the Nazis have transferred here significant forces and means from other directions. But this information, were fragmentary. Arriving from the rear of the enemy reconnaissance groups brought nothing new. And only afterwards we learned that Hitler's command, fearing the successful advance of the Soviet troops to Zlobin and Rogachev, transferred to this area 5 infantry divisions from near Moser, 2 infantry divisions and an SS brigade. This helped the enemy to stop the advance of the front troops. By the end of November, the front stabilized at the boundary of Chozy, Novy Bykov, east of Rogachev, Streshin, and further along the Pripyat River southeast of Mosia. Battles for improvement of positions began, tense and difficult. For more than 10 hours, the division broke through the defence north of Potopovka, reaching the line east of the farms Vyatoy, east of Pereslaya. The northern outskirts of the village Pavomasky advanced only 3 or 4 kilometres. True, by dawn the regiments were able to wrest from the enemy another 2 kilometres, and push him back to the western bank of the Okra River. I did not misspoke when I used the word tear out. That's exactly what happened. Fierce battles broke out not only for advantageous lines and settlements, but also for almost every meter of land. We lost many officers, sergeants, and soldiers. Captain Ivan Prozverkov, Senior Lieutenant Andrei Starchikov, Lieutenant Markali Isov, Junior Lieutenant Alexander Polin died a brave death. Junior Lieutenant Vasily Koptemir, the commander of the battery of 76mm guns, repelled the enemy counterattack to the last shell. And when the Nazi tank, which broke through to the position, began to crush the silenced guns, the officer got up, in a shredded overcoat, bleeding. He squeezed out of himself. "You won't get through, you bastard." Gathering the rest of his strength, the junior lieutenant threw a grenade under the track of the tank and lost consciousness. He was found here in a pool of blood. Nearby stood a steel fascist hulk with its caterpillar splayed out. Sinza forest village with a tiny railroad station, Staria Rudnia, comes to mind. To be more exact, only one name remained from the village and the sten. Being in the center of the front events, Staria Rudnia underwent such changes that even the natives did not recognize it. Instead of neat Belarusian huts, there were charcoals or ruins. Many houses were dismantled by fascists for engineering constructions. The outskirts and streets of the village were ploughed with trenches, communication lines, craters from bombs. The attempt to take Staria Rudnia from the start was not successful. Our units were met with heavy rifle and machine gun fire, lay down and began to entrench. Commanders reporting complained about the superiority of the enemy in manpower and equipment. Major Krasovsky called. The 828th Regiment had broken forward and now lay down under dagger continuous enemy fire. "Losses do not bear, Nikolai Viktorovich," interrogated the division commander. "It's not good. We need to make sure not to lose people. About artillery cannot help. There is nothing. Lagged behind. Get out of the situation on your own. Yes, with our own forces, Nikolai Viktorovich." Fyodor Semyonovich Danilovsky hung up the phone, stood up from his camp chair, looked under the crowns of pine trees standing nearby where the sappers were building a platform at some distance from the ground. "Can you see the regiments well?" he asked. "Yes, Comrade Colonel," answered the mustachioed sergeant. "Everything is like in the palm of your hand right here." "Hurry up," said the commander. "Let's finish, Comrade Colonel," said the sapper, continuing to work with an axe. The commander of the reconnaissance company arrived. While the driver killed the engine of the trophy motorcycle, the senior lieutenant reported. "We barely got through. The enemy stands everywhere tightly, except for the southeast, in the lowlands a little less frequent engineering structures, but there is water all the way to the ravine." Where? Colonel Danilovsky became animated. "Right here." The officer showed the corner of the forest on the map. "Let's go and have a look from the heights." The colonel invited the company commander to the improvised NP. Studying the terrain, Fyodor Semyonovich asked the officer about something for about 10 minutes, then invited Lieutenant Colonel Abashev. Now the three of them were already looking at the southeastern part of Staria Rudnia. "In your proposal, Fyodor Fedorovich, there is a rational grain coming off the platform," said Danilovsky. "Give the scouts the task to check the approaches to the village from the southeast once again." Danilovsky approached the artillery commander, Colonel Koputenko. "Well, God of War, where are your gunners? You let us down today. Oh, how you let us down. You're cutting them without a knife." Koputenko waved his hands. "I can't help it. I've been seeing that since this morning. I want batteries." "Comrade Colonel," the signalman ran up. "Major Zayats is on the phone for you." "Are you holding on, Philip Fedorovich?" Danilovsky answered the phone. "That's good. What? Counterattacking tanks? Don't let them through. Burn them. Burn with your own forces and means. I can't get you anything yet. I don't have any. Take an example from the neighbor. Krasovsky is more difficult. We have to hold back on 3 sides. Get in line with his flank. I expect good news from you, Philip Fedorovich." Fyodor Semyonovich put down the pipe, brushed the sticking pine needles off his epaulette. He was clean-shaven, his white cuff collar peeped out from under the collar of his uniform, and his boots glistened. Despite the fact that he had been on his feet for more than 24 hours, he looked cheerful. He worked, as usual, calmly and measuredly. He received information from the regimental commanders. gave them instructions, listened to the officers of the headquarters and officers from the parts, took his time to express his opinion on this or that issue, with everyone was even and tactful. One of the senior chiefs called and, apparently, began to reproach the artillery commander of the division. Fedor Semyonovich objected. Colonel Kaputenko and his staff are not alone to blame. I was also negligent. I trusted the maps. It turned out according to the proverb. It was smooth on paper, but we forgot about the ravines and to walk on them. We didn't take into account the slush. Now we're paying the price. We're pulling up the artillery. Notice Semyonovich. Colonel Kaputenko came running up out of breath. An officer from the Uptadovs has arrived. 2 batteries are in place. No good. It already means something. Danilovsky looked at the artillery commander, noticing that the colonel did not report everything. Asked, "What else have you got there?" He contacted the commander of the artillery regiment. "The 1st Division is about to be here, the 2nd and 3rd. Good." The commander smiled and turned to the chief of staff. "Fedor Fedorovich, have you received any information from the scouts yet?" They just reported. "The old information is confirmed." Then, Colonel Danilovsky looked at his watch. "Prepare a combat order to Zaitz and Krasovsky. Regiments to attack in an hour and a half. More need to strengthen Krasovsky," came the head of the political department. "He suffered heavy losses. It's hard for him. And here we have to attack." "Reinforce." Colonel Danilovsky thought for a moment. "No, I can't help in any way." Danilovsky found Abashev with his eyes. Fedor Fedorovich, fighter anti-tank batteries and artillery regiment division to subordinate to Kozhevnikov, to him to transfer attached to us tankers and a company of machine gunners. Standing next to the commander officers were silent. On their worried faces was evident that they have not yet understood the commander's plan. It was quite obvious. If the main blow is struck by the 828th and 889th Rifle Regiments, then it is where you need to send reserves. However, none of the staff did not dare to oppose Danilovsky. So Fedor Fedorovich, after a moment's pause, continued, "Commander, go to Kozhevnikov and personally set the task. You will start on my signal in 40 minutes as soon as Zayats and Krasovsky will attack, and already to eye. But Krasovsky and Zayats make a diversionary strike, so to speak, forcing the enemy to get bogged down in the battle. That's when Kozhevnikov will strike. From the southeast of Staria Ruda, the enemy is least likely to expect us. There's a flooded meadow, he hopes we'll hardly dare to attack from there." But even now, not all officers were not in agreement with the commander's plan. It's the fact that Major Kozhevnikov had to make a march. Although small, but in the conditions of slowing is not easy. On the flank had to move and artillery. The enemy could notice the maneuver and figure out the plan. "You doubt it," smiled Danilovsky. "Well, and rightly so. There is a risk." And after a pause, "But understand, the Nazis are waiting for our attack head-on. They will get it, and then they will not be to Kozhevnikov." "Right, Pyotr Vasilievich." Major Rumyantsev shrugged his shoulders. "You're being cautious, operator. It's not like you." The colonel wrinkled his nose, hesitated, apparently evaluating his decision once again, and after a minute or two he said, "Everyone to their places. Major Rumyantsev, take the place of the Chief of Staff. Take the reins in your hands. We have a lot of work to do today. Lieutenant Colonel Abashev until the end of the battle will be at Kozhevnikov." Fedor Semyonovich Danilovsky went up to his observation post and again began to consider the landscape spread out before him. At this time, from the command post reports, the corps commander arrived. A passenger car drove up. Major General Gartsev came out of it on the thawed snow, threw a glance at the decking on the pines. "What kind of a chicken coop is this? They'll think of it." "You can see better from here, Comrade General," explained Danilovsky, climbing down the steep ladder. "You don't take care of yourself, Fyodor Semyonovich," even Alexeyevich Gartsev said reproachfully. "The Germans are just waiting to kill you. You've spoiled them. Oh, and spoiled them. From Bryansk Scouts report. The Krauts have you on their radar. You'd better watch out. It's not a matter of hours. And don't go into the forest to fear the wolves." I know the saying." Gartsev waved his hand. "Report the situation. Why is still not taken Staria Rudnya?" Division commander invited Major General Gartsev to the map. "Let's look first from above. Gartsev showed us on the planking. We involuntarily smiled. Comcorps had just scolded Danilovsky for neglecting danger, and now he was doing the same. Soon they were surveying the terrain. From the fragments of phrases that came to us, we realized that Comcorps approves of Fyodor Semyonovich's idea. It's not a bad idea, stepping down from the deck, continued Major General. The Germans are sure. If the advantage is on our side, we will act straightforwardly. Thank you for your cleverness. But for the fact that the artillery did not arrive in time, we will still... Where's your artillery commander? He's moving fighter anti-tank batteries and a division to Kozvnikov. You'll have to ask me, Comrade General. Are you sorry? We say God is God's man and Caesar is Caesar's man. Naturally, we won't leave you out, Fyodor Semyonovich. Ivan Alexeyevich sat down on a camp chair, looked at Danilovsky. Go about your business, or else you'll say that the commander has torn you away from the organization of the battle. I'll stay here for a while. I'll see how the issue with Staria Rudnia will be solved. And a little choir, so things are not going well with your neighbor. The enemy is pulling back hard. The division commander heard the Chief of Intelligence Major Valentin Korotayev, Divisional Engineer Major Daniil Litvinov, Chief of Communications Major Alexei Ovchinnikov, on the phone received a report from the artillery commander. Exactly at 15 o'clock, 828th and 889th Rifle Regiments began the attack. The enemy met the head battalion's dense fire, and after 15 to 20 minutes himself went into counterattack. Who of the commanders does not know how agonizing these minutes? You mentally check yourself. Did you think everything through? Did you assess the situation correctly? Did something important fall out of sight? Colonel Danilovsky experienced something similar, helping Major Rumyantsev. I saw how worried the commander was, although he tried not to show it. Fyodor Semyonovich well understood that the subordinates do not care how the commander in a difficult situation. His composure always inspires respect. Sadly, the division commander was, as usual, calm, but the inattention slipped out. Here, Ops, in anxious anticipation, looks at Major Rumyantsev and finally could not stand it. What is it, Pyotr Vasilievich? Krasovsky reports. The company of anti-tank guns was surrounded by fascists. Lieutenant Islamov. Yes, him. The PTers are covering the right flank of the regiment. They set fire to 2 tanks and 4 armoured personnel carriers. But the enemy is advancing. Will they hold out? It's not the first time for Islamov. He'll hold on. A faint smile slipped across the worried face of the division commander. Apparently he remembered a recent meeting with a young officer, the mischievous gleam of his black eyes and his confident voice. Don't worry about us, Comrade Colonel. Our men are reliable, many times tested in battle. They will not let us down. And there's nothing to talk about anger at the German. Almost everyone has his own wound. Let him pay attention to the right flank. Help Islamov. Remind him also about presenting the lieutenant, platoon commanders, especially distinguished sergeants and soldiers of the company for awards. They deserve it. A new call interrupted the conversation between the colonel and Major Rumyantsev. Danilovsky picked up the phone, called his call sign. I'm listening to you, Nikolai Viktorovich. I listened for 3 minutes. No, we can't retreat. We are not liberating the land, our Russian Mother Earth, to give it up to the enemy. We must impose close combat on the enemy. And you, withdraw. Major Krasovsky is the commander of the best regiment, and suddenly he yields to the fascists. Where is this good, Nikolai Viktorovich? Nowhere. A similar conversation soon took place with Major Zayats, the only difference being that at the end of it, the commander said in an orderly tone, Shil Silip Fedorovich, your task is to attack. Distract the enemy's maximum forces. Understand me? Well then act. Don't worry about the left flank. We'll cover it. Pyotr Vasilievich, Danilovsky turned to Rumyantsev. I've been reported a battery of Iptidovs has arrived at the junction of roads. On the left flank of the 889th enemy is accumulating forces to strike. Sir Colonel Danilovsky waited some more time, and when the enemy pulled up reserves to the place of battle of the 828th and 889th Rifle Regiments, threw Major Kozhevnikov's regiment to the breakthrough. The Nazis, encountering the steadfastness of the regiments Krasovsky and Zayats, were firmly bogged down and could not oppose the plan of the division commander. After a short fire, raid battalions of the 862nd Rifle Regiment, under cover of artillery, and tanks went on the attack. Fighter anti-tank guns moved in platoon formations of rifle companies, destroyed enemy fire points and manpower, paving the way for the infantry. The infantrymen helped the artillerymen to push the guns out of water-filled ditches and funnels. The battle was played out in the first trench. Even battalion commanders participated in hand-to-hand combat. I captured the first houses of Staria Ruda. Major Kozhevnikov reported to division headquarters. Thank you, Vasily Antonovich. Thanked the regiment commander Danilovsky. Don't let the enemy come to his senses, press on him. I'll pass on your success, Krasovsky, and But we did not have to transmit. There was no time for that. Major General Gartsev, who had come up a few minutes earlier, shouted, Nesyudor Semyonovich. Zaitis' regiment went on the attack, soon went up to the enemy and Krezl. A few minutes later, Major Zayats called, Thank you very much for your help. The battery not only repelled the enemy counterattack, but also destroyed up to a company of enemy tanks. When we heard the rumble of battle from the southeast of Staria Ruda, the battalions went up in attack. Isn't it Kozhevnikov who's operating there? I guessed. Now our role is clear. See you in Staria Ruda, Comrade Colonel. See you, Philip Fedorovich. Chiny sighting was reaching a higher note, gradually encircling the village from both sides. Regimental commanders firmly and flexibly managed their subordinate units. Rifle battalions and companies bypassed individual enemy resistance nodes. Assault groups were left to master them, tore toward the railroad station. The German command was trying to restore order. The airwaves were full of instructions, but in response commanders of units asked for help, reported alarming news about the Russian wedging into their fighting order. It is difficult to note who fought better for the possession of Staria Ruda. All acted skillfully, resolutely. In the incoming reports to the headquarters listed many names of distinguished soldiers, sergeants, officers. Some junior lieutenant Pavel Kravtsov fascists, cut off from the company. For more than an hour the young officer repelled the attacks of superior enemy forces. When ammunition was running out, the junior lieutenant decided to break through, and with the cry for the motherland, for the party, forward. He led the remaining soldiers in the attack. With grenades, fire of machine guns, infantrymen broke their way, joined the company and delivered the mortally wounded commander on a stretcher. The gun crew under the command of Sergeant Ivan Moskvin destroyed 2 enemy firing points. The artillerymen did not falter, having entered into a duel with the Nazi assault gun crew. The score was counting on seconds. 2 will be ahead in the shot. Our gunners turned out to be more skillful. The German armoured machine shuddered and was enveloped in smoke. Filter calculation of Sergeant Alexei Sokolov decided the outcome of the Hitlerites' counterattack. The brave warrior continued to lead the battle till the last moment of his life. Senior Sergeant Timofey Denisov, during the offensive, was in the combat order of the rifle company. He corrected the fire of the platoon, which destroyed 3 machine guns and over a dozen Hitlerites. Red Army man Pyotr Myasnikov, during the offensive, provided the commander with reliable communication, fixed more than 60 breaks of the telephone cable. Private Alexei Motasov, Vasily Stepanenko, Evgeny Moroshenko, and others also distinguished themselves during the battle. In the success of the battle contributed to the sappers, anti-aircraft gunners, soldiers of other specialties. 23 years old sanitary instructor, senior sergeant of medical service, Elena Dolgova carried 32 wounded from the battlefield. Is it not a feat? Bragg gradually rolled back. Parts of the division were pushing him in the direction of the small Belarusian town of Zloben, covered from the front and flanks by artillery. Corps Commander Major General Gartsev, throughout the battle for Staria Ruda, did not interfere in the affairs of the commander and staff. On his cheerful face it was easy to guess that he was satisfied with the organization and conduct of the offensive. The good mood finally took possession of him when the 889th and 828th Rifle Regiments went up and attacked in friendship. The commander went downstairs, approached Major Rumyantsev. Pyotr Vasilievich, take command here. What does Abashiev report? Kozhevnikov is fighting for the railroad station. The Krauts are stubborn. We had to pull the batteries of the fighter anti-tank division close to the rifle battalions. Now they're storming the railroad station. Tell Abashiev to provide an artillery barrier from Zlobin. No matter how the Germans try to use the armoured train. It's true that he hasn't made a sound for the last half a day. However, I think it would be a good precaution. The phone rang. Lieutenant Colonel Abashev. Rumyantsev handed Danilovsky a telephone receiver. Yes, Fyodor Fedorovich. Staria Rudnia is in our hands. Thank you. Give my thanks to the soldiers and remind the commanders to present all those who have distinguished themselves for rewards. I'll please the corps commander. Colonel Danilovsky and Major General Gartsev went to the officers' mess tent. We continued to collect data, mapped the latest changes in the situation. Meanwhile, the battle gradually moved away and went westward. Captain Peter Gerasimova was sent to Staria Rudnia by a group of officers to find a room for the headquarters. It was not an easy matter. The few brick buildings were destroyed by aircraft or blown up by the Nazis during the retreat, and the wooden ones were mostly burned down. In the end, they found a spacious hut. Gerasimov chose it. The commander and the chief of staff agreed with him. While the headquarters moved to a new place, the early December twilight fell. At this time, the division reached the western outskirts of the small village of Kulch, State Farm Kulch, Railroad Station Kulch, cutting into parts of the enemy grouping in the area. However, we could not advance further. The enemy was firmly entrenched in pre-prepared positions, passing along the southern outskirts of the settlements of Chetburki, Lugovaya, Viria. At this line, the division units were delayed for several days, conducted reconnaissance, pulled up the rear. During these days, radio and newspapers brought glad tidings not only from the fronts of war and labor, but also from the conference of the heads of the governments of the USSR, USA, and England held in Tehran. Actually, materials of the Tehran conference were of great interest to us, the workers of the front line of the war. At the conference, it was about the opening of the Second Front, about the post-war organization of Germany, which means about the soon peace, with which the thoughts and aspirations of each of us were connected. The proximity of the long-awaited victory was exhilarating. On December 5, the order to surrender the battle area was received. By 3 o'clock the next day, the units concentrated in the area of small settlements Skelnya 1 and Skelnya 2. The division was received and the order of Major General Kazov. On the same day, according to the order of the Corps headquarters, the division went to the Dnieper. Before us, other divisions of the Corps arrived on the bank of the Dnieper. Soon the reinforcements began to arrive. In a relatively small area, in addition to riflemen for a few days, were concentrated artillery, separate guards, mortar division, tank brigade, and other units. The purpose of the maneuver, to cut off from the west Jobin grouping of the enemy. Our division was in the second echelon of the Corps. Using the temporary lull, regiments and battalions continued to erect defensive lines along the southern outskirts of Maly Stremen, Novaya Kamenka and Chervony Radutin, Kamenka State Farm, Mark 145.5, Staria Kamenka. At the same time, conducted reconnaissance work on the paths of probable entry into battle division. In the morning of December 14, after a strong artillery preparation, the Corps went on the offensive. Acting in the direction of the breakthrough 273rd Infantry Division seized the stronghold of Pudimov and came to the unnamed heights northwest of the river Dubsta. Here it was subjected to a powerful counterattack of the enemy. The intensity of the battle could be judged by the low, ominous rumbling, clearly audible at our positions. In a few hours the rumbling increased, began to expand. The battle was approaching us. Soon came the message that the 273rd Division was forced to abandon the captured positions. The situation became more complicated. This was confirmed by the worried face of Major Korotayev, who returned from the front line. Nizadolpututi, as the publicized, said the chief of intelligence, did not consider the losses. Korotayev showed on the map the direction of enemy counterattacks and the position of parts of the 273rd Rifle. At this time appeared officer of the Corps headquarters with a package. Lieutenant Colonel Abashev tore open the envelope, familiarized himself with the contents of the document contained in it, went to the division commander. In about 10 minutes, Fyodor Fedorovich returned. Pyotr Vasilievich, he invited Major Rumyantsev to his desk and prepare an order to the units to take the initial position. They once again on the map clarified the areas of concentration of units, the time of their arrival at the designated places. As preparation for the advance began, phones came alive. Officers of the headquarters dispersed to assist the commanders of units and control their actions. It was getting darker. The night was approaching, which complicated the task. Although the routes for regiments and battalions were known in advance, we had to be careful. The possibility of ground reconnaissance groups working in the rear of our troops was not excluded. There came thick, wet snow. Large white flakes flew unhurriedly, covered the ground and buildings with an even layer, hung on branches. Hats dressed hedges. The white flakes hid the horsemen leaving the headquarters. Higgins is not enough, the indignant divisional engineer. As in battle, so slush. And when will it end, damn it? The weather really did not please us. Neither autumn nor winter. The snow would fall and then melt, filling the already wet, soggy lowlands and swamps with ice water. The air was thickly saturated with moisture, water squelched in their shoes, and damp clothes made their bodies chill. People were cursing God and all the saints, threatening with their fists. But the weather still did not improve. It would freeze for a day or two, and then thaw again. And it was already the middle of December. In our situation, perhaps, the most difficult thing was for the sappers. Day and night, in the icy slurry. We removed mines, built shelters, made crossings over numerous rivers and streams, plastered the Belarusian sinks, prepared timber. In the last days, when we reached the western bank of the Dnieper and the direction of the offensive became known. In front of the division for dozens of kilometers lay a swampy terrain with islands of alder and willow bushes and rare birch trees. Soon the headquarters began to receive good information. Regiments and battalions went on schedule. Tired arrived from Zayats and Krasovsky Colonel Danilovsky and the head of the political department, Lieutenant Colonel Zhivago. On their lively faces it was easy to understand that things are not bad at all. Scouts are in a good mood. Fyodor Semyonovich, the head of the political department, finished the conversation, apparently started on the road. Junior Sergeant Bludo said to me, "It's time to finish with the German. My hands are bored with work. I sleep and see myself in the field. And I'm not the only one. Everyone is longing for the usual man's work. You only hear in conversations, and at my place, and it's time to get out of these swamps, to chase the fascists further." The advance to the initial area went well, but during the change of parts of the 273rd Infantry Division, there was almost an unpleasant mishap. No sooner had the forward battalions of our regiments approached the front line, as the predecessors began to hastily leave the trenches. This did not escape the enemy's reconnaissance. The Nazis moved to counterattack, and they would have realized their plan, took our positions, not appearing Battalion 862nd Rifle Regiment Captain Ivan Kuznetsov. The young but experienced, strong-willed officer was not confused. He turned his companies and struck the counter-attacking Hitlerites in the flank. The enemy was not up to our trenches. There was a firefight, which with small interruptions lasted almost until the morning or until the regiments took positions, and Kuznetsov did not take the battalion out of the fire. However, we had to worry a lot. This incident was a good lesson for us for the future. In the morning of December, 16 regiments went on the attack, however without success. Artillerymen failed to destroy the fire system, not to mention its reliable suppression. Without this, there was nothing to dream of accomplishing the task. The enemy firmly held the occupied positions. 2 days later, we became part of the 48th Army, then withdrawn to the second echelon of the corps and began to equip the rear line of defense. In these days, there was a meeting, the dream of which I had been living since the fall of 1941. On a freezing December day, I and a group of staff officers had to leave for one of the regiments. Our Willys stood by the side of the road, packed with military equipment. The driver, a young soldier, after an unsuccessful attempt to squeeze into the roadway, was waiting for the last car of the next column to pass. We jumped down from the Willys and, having smoked, looked at the roaring tractors pulling huge pontoons. A bomb disposal unit was passing along the road. When the heavy vehicles tumbled from side to side on the potholes of the broken dirt road, it seemed to me that the huge pontoons were about to roll into a brown mush and drag the vehicles with them. But the tractor miraculously leveled out, and I sighed with relief. It will be to whom but to them, Major Rumyantsev said sympathetically, until we get out of this quagmire. In a word, Polsy, not a field and not a forest, I burst out. In our land, we've heard all sorts of stories about such perishing places. Men avoided them, except in 40-degree frosts the most desperate dared to go for deadwood. Someone's strong hands clenched my shoulders. I turned around. My father's eyes were staring at me wide open, joyfully frightened and so dear to me. My father lowered his hands and froze. For a minute we looked at each other in silence. A lump caught in my throat from the unexpected joy. Finally, my father moved his weathered lips silently. Son, I guessed rather than heard the hoarse, familiar voice. My father's eyes glistened with tears, his lips trembled. I came to my senses, as if awakening from a moment's forgetfulness. Mattia, I grabbed my father in my arms and kissed his chapped lips, clutching him tightly. My dear Mattia. I don't remember how long we stood like that, not letting each other out of our embrace, as if afraid that the marvelous vision would disappear. My comrades surrounded us in a tight ring and were also silent. Did you really meet your father, Sasha? At last I heard Rumyantsev's excited voice. My father loosened his embrace and, lowering his arms, turned to the officers with an embarrassed smile. Greetings, my sons. Hello, father. Rumyantsev extended his hand. From the bottom of my heart, I congratulate you on a happy meeting. My father carefully took Pyotr Vasilievич's hand and shook it firmly, and then the dam of silence broke. Everyone was surprised and joyfully clamoring, pushing, rushing to my father and shaking his hand firmly, squeezing me in his arms. This is how good fortune has come to you, Alexander, smiled Pyotr Vasilievich. On this occasion I release you from the trip. Go to headquarters, stay with your father. I'll send to warn his superiors. In the tent of the operational department we found Gerasimov, gluing with a soldier drawer next map of the area of combat operations. Having learned about what had happened, he warmly greeted my father and conspiratorially blinked at it. Let's talk here, and I'll be right back. He rushed out of the tent, dragging the soldier with him. Left alone and seated at the table, we looked at each other in silence. And me, Sasha, my heart seemed to tell me that we would meet. An unfamiliar officer would appear in the distance and my soul would freeze, if it was not you. But now I can't believe it. Covering his palm with mine, he explained. It seems to me that this is not happening to me in reality. How many times I've seen you in my dreams. I am real, father. I am real. I squeezed his palm. You see, I'm alive and well. But we'll never see Mishutka again, my father said bitterly. We won't find his grave. His eyes reflected immense sadness, which for a moment extinguished all the joy of our meeting. He should live and live, sighed my father sadly, but you see how it turns out. I walk the earth, though, and in fact 3 wars behind me, and saw this very life from behind and in front, and what did he? Our Mikhail, see? He just started to get on his feet. And here you are, mother still can't find a place. Maybe he's alive, and what can I write to her since it's such a meat grinder? If he was alive, he'd have shown up long ago, and the funeral letter clearly said, died a brave death in the battles for Moscow. I have a stone in my heart, and what is it like for my mother, who every day waits for a funeral for you and me? It's hard for her, Sasha. It's hard for her. Write to her more often. The war, father, there's nothing you can do. Yes, one consolation. Our Mikhail didn't give his life for nothing, but my heart still hurts. My father inhaled a puff of Makoro smoke and added a little more quietly. I feel sorry for you young, healthy guys. What an injustice. You die and people like me live. Just the other day my platoon commander was cut down by a fascist. But we were standing elbow to elbow, so we were drilling a road. And then out of nowhere, an airplane. The Kraut began to dive, who went where, and the lieutenant took his gun and began to shoot at the vulture. What kind of weapon is that against an airplane? Fritz slapped it. You're always talking about death and death. Come on, father, about life. That's what I'm talking about, son. Only in a different way, maybe in a simple way. You young men sometimes go too far. A bad death has never glorified anyone. Our conversation was interrupted by Gerasimov's arrival. Well, we had a heart-to-heart talk, and now we should celebrate the meeting, he said, putting a flask, a can of stew, a loaf on the table. My father threw off his overcoat, washed his face, combed his greying but still thick hair. Despite the half-century he had lived, he looked lean and sturdy. They drank to the meeting, to the victory, to the safe return home. We remembered our relatives and friends. The conversation dragged on. A few hours flew by like a blink of an eye. My father suddenly woke up and, pulling out an antique watch from his pocket, exclaimed worried, Mother of God, time is running away. Now I don't know where to look for my battalion. It must have gone far away. It's nothing, father. You'll catch up with your battalion. I hurried to calm my father. In fact, what's your hurry? Major Rumyantsev warned your superiors. In the morning, Gerasimov, after long telephone conversations, found out about the location of my father's unit, and we set off on our way. During the conversation, did not notice how walked a few kilometers. Well, that's enough. My father suddenly stopped. You will go on alone. It's time for you to go back, son. Let's say goodbye. We stood looking at each other, hesitating to make the first step. Finally, my father held me tightly to his chest and turned resolutely. He walked quickly down the road with his head down low. He walked on without lifting his head, as if he were afraid to turn. I looked after him for a long time, hoping to make a last farewell wave of my hand. But then my father stopped and looked back. I waved. He waved back and headed west again. And I, not taking my eyes off the rapidly receding figure, whispered, "No, goodbye, father. Will I see you again?" And again the front roads separated us in different directions. But the memory of this unexpected meeting remained forever. It warmed me on cold nights, helped me to withstand the difficult battles. My father also remembered it. Through January 14 to 16, 1944, the division was conducting defensive work, identifying the enemy's fire system. Relative calm gave an opportunity to follow the events developing on other fronts, and they were joyful. The troops of the 1st Ukrainian Front in the area of Zhytomyr and Berdichev advanced to a distance of 80 to 200 kilometers, covering the left wing of the enemy grouping in the area of Cherniv. The 2nd Ukrainian Front pushed back the enemy to the west of the Dnieper 40-50 kilometers. On January 14 began the operation of the troops of the Leningrad and Volkhov fronts to lift the blockade from the cradle of the revolution, the city of Leningrad. Within a week they defeated the flank groups of the 18th German Army in the areas of Ropsha, Krasnoye Selo and Novgorod. Not yet still treading water, Mew frowned his eyebrows. Commander Colonel Vovin Sergei Andreevich arrived to us recently. Colonel Fedor Semenovich Danilovsky left at the disposal of the corps commander. Naturally, the new division commander wanted to find himself in the position to win the authority by combat deeds. On the night of January 16, we were replaced by the 273rd Rifle Division. Regiments went to the 2nd Echelon of the corps. In connection with the breakthrough of the enemy, on the left flank of the army received an order to redeploy. Together with other compounds, we were moved there. The march was organized and without losses. German aircraft tried several times to storm the columns, but we managed to slip away, and the bombing strikes came on empty places. In the afternoon of January 26, the 828th and 889th Infantry Regiments reached the line Veliki Bor, the edge of the forest, the Ipa River, where at night they replaced parts of the 399th Infantry Division of Colonel Danil Vasilievich Kazakevich and came into contact with Vienna. On the right operated the 273rd Rifle Division of our corps, and on the left, the 172nd Rifle Division of the 95th Rifle Corps. The situation on this section of the front was as follows. After the breakthrough, Hitlerites, under the onslaught of our troops, again withdrew to the previously prepared positions on the bank of the river Ips. In the first and second lines of its defense were along the banks of the river. The third was in the rear. The water mirror of the river was not wide, but because of the thaw, Ipa overflowed and in some places reached a kilometer wide. Situation. Looking at the map, shook his head Lieutenant Colonel Hare. It will not be easy here. Wherever you go, everywhere there is a wedge. Water everywhere. He was acting as Chief of Staff of the division in connection with the departure of Lieutenant Colonel F.F. Abashev to the Army headquarters, knowing the staff work, restrained, but at the same time demanding Philip Zayat's appeal to everyone. The division commander decided to strike the enemy in two directions, on the right flank, on Mikhailovka and Pratika, on the left flank, on Dubrava, then go to the line Rakovichi, Nikolaevka, and now, for the umpteenth time, Lieutenant Colonel Zayats and Major Rumiantsev worked out possible variants of the upcoming battle. What other units besides the 87th Infantry have the fascists? Pyotr Silevich, the CTN's reports, 31st Engineer Battalion, and at the junction with the neighbour on the right 134th Infantry Division. Wow! No, true, they're not the freshest. But the enemy is on the defensive and we need to attack. You know the difference. Yes, of course I do. That's right. Then we talked about means of reinforcing the regiments. But no matter how they racked their brains, no matter what they thought up, the available means were not enough to outnumber the enemy. Aviation will support. Included in the conversation entered the dugout Colonel Voktovi, and artillery corps promised to help. "Do not discount the spirit of our people," reminded the head of the political department, Lieutenant Colonel Zhivago. "Moral superiority on our side. Although the fascists now have an advantage in equipment, still they are not what they were before. Reports from the fronts don't make them happy." That's the way it was. Nevertheless, events unfolded for us differently than expected. The 828th Rifle Regiment was stopped at the positions of the regimental reserves of the enemy. Acting commander of the 889th Rifle Regiment, Major Valentin Yevstofievich Pavyuk, reporter, came out 2 battalions to the swamp near the village of Dubrava, but could not advance further. The chains lay down under crossfire of Hitlerites. "The enemy cannot be strong everywhere," answered the calls of commanders Sergei Andreevich Vodovin. "Find gaps in his defense. Conduct reconnaissance." 3 days regiments fought hard. The enemy continuously counterattacked at one and another site. His aviation literally hung in the air. On the night of January 30, the Hitlerites destroyed the Lezhnevka through the swamp near the village Dubrava. Soldiers of the 889th Regiment, sappers attached to the regiment, cut down trees, filled them in water and liquid mud, restored the crossing. The Nazis methodically shelled the soldiers paving the way, covered the trenches, hastily dug in the damp ground with artillery and mortar fire. The soldiers cursing at all costs the thaw, the terrain where their frontline fate had brought them. The Germans, who had settled on the dominant heights in the farms and warm houses of Dubrava, Pritika, Mikhailovka, continued to carry out the order. So at night, divisional and regimental scouts crossed the front line, took tongues. Major Valentin Korotayev summarized the extracted data, reported to the Chief of Staff. The enemy was firmly entrenched, and knock it out was not easy. To increase the blow to the enemy through the fighting order of the 828th Rifle Regiment was put into battle 102nd Rifle Division. It managed to squeeze the Krauts and to settle the road Pratika, Radi, but still remained unresolved tasks facing the parts of our division. Dubrava, Mikhailovka, Radin, Rakovichi were in the hands of the fascists. Commanders, headquarters were looking for a way out of the situation, and they found it. The beginning of Dubrava liberation was laid by scouts of Petty Officer Peter Blokin from the 889th Regiment. Having found swampy fords, they proposed to break into the village at night and knock the Germans out of it, in the worst case to seize their trenches near Dubrava. The initiative of the sortie belonged to Sergeant Kim Nikishkin, a scout known not only in the regiment, but in the entire division. Quick, decisive, agile. The vital forces seemed to be cramped in his small body. He was the first to be called to go in search or ambush, in the attack always rushed forward. On the night of January 31, 1944, Kim Nikishkin and his comrades were making their way through the swamp to Dubrava. From the west to the village went divisional scouts, as well as dedicated for this stage of the battle sappers, anti-tankers, mortarmen, and machine gun crews. Crossing the swamp, the scouts eliminated the enemy guard and captured the outermost houses of the village. However, the Germans came to their senses quickly. There followed a fascist counterattack, and then, with increasing power, another and another. In the end, they managed to dislodge our platoon from the village. Machine gunner Junior Sergeant Sergo Chegladze, a tall, stately Georgian, was covering the scouts' retreat. While firing, he kept changing his position, and the Germans at first thought that several machine guns were operating. But soon the trick was unraveled, and the soldiers began to go around the fighter from right and left. Chegladze, letting them get closer, fired a rocket at the officer. He screamed and pushed his face into the snow. Chegladze started throwing grenades. The Germans were forced to move back. After a while, they went on the attack again. Chegladze, who had time to reload the machine gun, again forced the Nazis to cling to the ground. The tape ran out. The junior sergeant took up the machine gun. The magazine of the machine gun was empty. He had to resort to grenades once again. They ran out of grenades too. And at that moment, Sergo remembered that after one of his bursts, the German machine gun, firing nearby, had fallen silent. It was silent even now. The Nazi must not have used up his ammunition, went through his mind. A languid moment passed, and in the darkness of the night the machine gun rang again. The Hitlerites screamed frantically. "Musée Sergo, withdraw," he heard Blokin's voice. "Now, comrade Petty Officer, now I'll beat them up, so that next time they wouldn't be forced to counterattack at night." The junior sergeant with a U-turn led the barrel across the clearing, where the enemies appeared and snatched several people from Hitler's chain at once. The Germans lay down. They began to echo. Chegladze began to hit, orienting himself on the voices. The fascists were silent. Nzakaudel, withdraw, repeated the order Blokin. Mem, succumbing comrade petty officer. He jerkily crossed the clearing, dropped down beside Blokin. What a good shot you are. The petty officer met him. How many krauts you've piled up. Do you have cat eyes? Metzes. I'm a mountaineer, a hunter. Let's go. They're waiting for us. Soon they were in the trenches repulsed from the Germans, adapted by scouts to a circular defence. From Dubrava came commands in German, heard the chatter of enemy soldiers, the rumble of car engines, the crackle of motorcycles. They are gathering their own. Looking in the direction of the village, Nikishkin gritted through his teeth. We gave them a ruck. Not only the noise, S. Ivan Neshayev, but also something else. I saw how you, comrade sergeant, put a grenade in the hut with officers. I thought, if any of them survived, I added an anti-tank grenade. There was no need for that, and the commander knows that I used the grenade for a wrong purpose. He will ask me. Afterwards we'll sort out what was going on. I heard Chegladze's retort. Is that you, Genetsvale? Nikishkin turned to him. I am. Who else? No, thank you. You helped us out today, really helped us out. Debt is red with payment. These words were not said by chance. Chegladze joined the army family without any frontline experience. He learned a lot here. Comrades helped him to learn Russian weapons, commanders to get used to the combat situation. Secretary of the Komsomol organization, Private Alexei Kondratov, involved in social work. The party leader of the company, Sergeant Sergei Andreevich Sharov, not once taught a lesson of courage. In the army, Chegladze became a candidate for party membership. He was awarded 2 medals for combat merits, the Order of Glory, I agree. On the epaulets appeared patches of a junior sergeant. Now it was a skillful knowing the value of courage warrior, who was respected by his comrades, in whom, as in himself, believed the commander, entrusting him with the most difficult tasks. And it was no coincidence that he was with the scouts, on whom the command pinned great hopes. Half an hour later, the fascists launched a new counterattack, but again rolled back. The fight lasted until the morning. At night managed to overcome the swamp advanced battalions of the regiment. The headquarters also crossed. Major Modin called to himself Peter Blokin. Short, with a sharp face, petty officer began to leisurely report. In Dubrava failed to hold. The fascists had a big advantage. We had to retreat, but the group was stuck to the trenches of the enemy. We destroyed up to a company of German infantry, 4 armoured personnel carriers. Our losses. I know about them from your report, but why don't you report on those who distinguished themselves? Are you being No, I'm not modest. He shrugged his shoulders. I don't know who to recognize. All fought honourably. Sergeant Nikishkin's group threw grenades at the headquarters dugout, acted boldly during the seizure of houses in Dubrava, and when it came to repelling attacks, there's nothing to say. No matter how the Krauts cut us off, we carried out the wounded. Only one killed infantryman was not in time. Here Junior Sergeant Chegladze showed himself well, made the Germans nervous. Present the guys for awards. Write material on the scouts and on temporarily subordinates. Everyone should be honoured. Modin's conversation with Blokin was interrupted by another Hitlerite counterattack. Spurring themselves with drunken shouts, they went in full height. Whoa, lunatics! Blokin threw a glance at the Germans. I'll run to the guys. Yes, go. The enemy was thrown back, and then our units with the support of anti-tankers and mortars went on the attack. On the outskirts of Dubrava again fought. In one of the fights, Sergei Chegladze distinguished himself again. Paving the way for his comrades with fire, he shot fascists at point-blank range. He was wounded. He refused to go to the rear. The communist's place is in the ranks of the attackers, he answered the company's commander. After Dubrava we will recover. However, the brave son of the Georgian people could not recover. He was killed in the street of the village. The brave Georgian warrior never knew that the regiment headquarters had already received a list of his nomination for the highest award of the motherland, the title of Hero of the Soviet Union. After the capture of Dubrava, the regiment turned to the north. which contributed to the capture by the 862nd and 828th Infantry Regiments of the settlements of Pritika, Mikhailovka, and then Radin. The division in difficult conditions without roads successfully accomplished the task. Many soldiers in these battles covered themselves with unfading glory. The collective feats of the platoons of Lieutenants Kokarev and Shorin will never be forgotten from my memory. Completely surrounded fighters and commanders to the end fulfilled their military duty. The commanders of rifle companies, Senior Lieutenant Viktor Platonov, Lieutenant Ivan Polorotov, Battalion Commissar Evgeny Nitaterachuk, Junior Lieutenant Fyodor Lipatov, and many other officers, sergeants and soldiers died a brave death. Combat deeds of fellow soldiers were marked by orders and medals. Many soldiers of the division were honored with government awards. Among them, officers Mikhail Kostrov, Semyon Ganin, Vasily Igorov, Senior Sergeants Mikhail Sorokin, Konstantin Dizin, Ivan Papakai, Junior Sergeant Garmat Gainov, Private Vladimir Kostaykip, and others. Of the division until February 28, 1944, fought alternately hard offensive and defensive battles with the enemy. At this time, on other fronts, there were important events. The defeat of the Korsun-Shevchenkovsky grouping of the enemy was completed. Fascists lost here 55,000 soldiers and officers killed. More than 18,000 Hitlerites were captured. As a result of Lutsk-Grovno offensive operation, the Soviet troops cleared from the enemy a significant part of the right bank Ukraine. Krivoreshko-Nikopol offensive operation was successfully carried out. The Soviet offensive in January. February had important strategic results. The enemy was crushed at Zitomir and Berdyshev, Kirovograd and Korsun-Shevchenkovsky, Rivne and Letsk, Nikopol and Kryvyi Rog.